Good day, everybody, and welcome to our next message in Matthew chapter 5. And one of the very difficult things about this remote video calling is that I can't see your face. And oftentimes I see and I get emotions, feedback from people. But nevertheless, we do what we can and we try to do our best. And the Bible says, where two or three are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them. And I'm sure God knew that one day we will be together like this. Anyway, our message today is about divorce. A rather touchy subject amongst many people. A subject that requires much thought and much interpretation. A subject that many people would want to avoid. A subject that has a huge amount of controversy. We're going to be looking in Matthew chapter 5 today. It follows on from last week's message with regards to adultery, and a good message indeed it was, and gave us food for thought. And this thing about divorce is in the same passage, or almost in the same paragraph as that of adultery, and there seems to be a dynamic link, as we'll see later on, between divorce and adultery. Beginning at verse 31, it says, "It hath been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement." Verse 32, "But I say unto you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery. And whosoever shall marry her that is divorced, committeth adultery." So this thing about adultery is actually a very serious thing in the eyes of God. One woman wrote after her divorce, "Our divorce has been the most painful, horrid, ulcer-producing, agonizing event you can imagine. I wish I could put on this piece of paper for all the world to see a picture of what divorce feels like. Maybe my picture would stop people before it's too late." Divorce is not a pleasant thing to go through. And many people think that a divorce is only between me and my spouse. But there is a greater thing happening here. If there are children involved, there's lots of pain and suffering for the children. Children are being torn apart to pick sides, to testify for and against either mother or father. In the world today, divorce is just so easy. Do you know that you can go to the CNA and buy a book on quick divorce? One thing we do forget is that marriage is a very high calling. In Matthew chapter 19 verse 6, Jesus says, "Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let no man put asunder." Marriage is forever. Jesus here looks towards where God created the marriage unit in the Garden of Eden when he created man and woman. And when he brought Adam and Eve together, and he brought them in a marriage so that they can become one flesh. And we'll see later on about this, that this was the whole intent of marriage, is so that man and woman might not be alone. We need to realize that marriage is a very high calling, and to take it lightly is a very dangerous thing. First of all, we need to understand that marriage is a covenant. It should not be surprising that God declares in Malachi chapter 2 verse 16 that he hates divorce. And why does he hate divorce? Well, one of the reasons probably is that marriage is meant to be a special covenant, a special promise a special bond between a man and a woman and their God. Malachi chapter 2 verse 16 says this, For the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away, for one covereth violence with his garment, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit, that ye deal not treacherously. This putting away, or otherwise divorce, has never been from the beginning. God hates divorce. Next week, Brady will speak about vows and promises and the seriousness of that. One of the things that makes marriage serious is the promise and the covenant that we make to one another before many witnesses and before God. So what is the purpose of marriage? In order to understand divorce, we need to understand what the purpose of marriage is all about. Another reason God hates divorce is because it tears at the very heart of God's redemptive plan for the world. The world looks upon Christians and the home to see what a proper functioning society should be like. It is interesting to note that the conversation between Jesus and the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 19, verses 3 to 9, we'll see that just now, when the Pharisees asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason at all? We see here that they seem to tempt Jesus, wanting him to make a mistake, wanting him to say something that they can look towards and accuse him of. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason at all? It came about in the Jewish Torah and the Jewish writings that they would seek any reason for divorce. If a woman had oversalted the food, the man could divorce her. If he had burnt his steak, he could divorce her. If he didn't like her appearance, he could divorce her. So what is the purpose of marriage? Well, we need to understand that first of all, marriage is to reflect God's image. God created man in his own image, of his own likeness. When he brought man together, he brought them together so that you and I could reflect and mirror who God is, the image of God. After God had created the earth and the animals, he said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. The account over here continues. And God created man in his own image, as I said before. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female created he them. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to 27. What does this mean? What does it mean to reflect or mirror God's image? If you're married, your marriage and our marriage should exalt God and glorify him alone. We should be able to reflect the redemptive work, the forgiveness, and the glory and honor of God to the rest of the world. The world that desperately needs to see who God is, to see his love, to see his kindness. Because we're created in God's image, people who wouldn't otherwise see God should be able to look at us, at you and I, and get a small glimpse of his character and who he is. So the purpose of marriage, number one, is to reflect or mirror the image of God. Purpose number two is so that we can complete each other. Remember, man, God said, it's not good for him to be alone. To complete each other, to experience companionship, that's why God said it is not good for man to be alone. He said, I will make him a helper suitable for him in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18. Marriage, therefore, is so that man and woman can be complete. They become one flesh. The third thing And the third purpose of marriage is to produce a godly legacy. To multiply, God said, is our duty. But God's original plan called for the home to be a sort of greenhouse, a nurturing place where children can grow up and learn the character, the values, and the integrity of God. In Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 6 to 7 tells us this: "These words which I'm commanding you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up." Our duty is to take the knowledge, the love, the redemption work of God, of Jesus Christ, and pass that on as a legacy to our children, and their children, and their children. Without marriage, that would be impossible to do, because, strictly speaking, the bed and children can only be conceived inside the bondage of marriage. And we'll see that at a later stage, at some other time. Marriage is by far more important than most of us realize. In today's world, people live together, they get married at a whim, and then they divorce at a whim. Marriage, it affects God's reputation on the planet. That is why He hates divorce. And that is why it is essential for you to set the goal and to be set apart so that you can show Jesus to the world. So that you can show the world and society what a home really is all about. Many studies have shown there are lots of crime and lots of bad things that happen in the world today can be traced to some part to a divided and bad home. A home where there is no discipline, a home where the marriage is not sacred, a home where there's no respect between mother and father, between children and parents, where the wife does not respect the mother, wife does not respect the husband, and the husband doesn't honor the wife and protect her. We can see that produces a society that is at anarchy with God. God meant for marriage to be a good thing. It is not a bond, it is not a ball and chain as we often joke about. It is a blessing from God. However, in our passage today and in Matthew chapter 19, we see that there's this, what many people refer to as the exception clause. Does God want you to get divorced? No, He does not. He never commanded anywhere in the Bible for you and I to accept divorce as an alternative. This exception clause refers to Deuteronomy 24 verse 1. Specifically, the only term for divorcement means uncleanness. Let's read Deuteronomy chapter 24 and verse 1, if I can just find it here quickly. It says, Deuteronomy chapter 24 verse 1, speaking of divorce, "When a man hath taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, because he hath found some uncleanness in her, let him write her a bill of divorcement, and give it in her hand, and send her out of his house." Now, this seems to be an exception to the rule, where God says, no, I do not accept divorce except in this situation. This word here, uncleanness, the Hebrew word here is erva, which means nudity or nakedness and shame that results from this. It is only translated here in Deuteronomy 20 and 23 verse 14 and Deuteronomy 24 verse 1 as unclean. All other places it is translated naked or nakedness. In many cases, this refers to illicit and lustful sex or similar. So, this uncleanness does not have a very broad meaning, as the Hebrews had taken on many, many years before. It doesn't mean that if your wife slowly does not respect you, or if your wife does not salt your food correctly, that you can divorce her for any reason. If you look at Leviticus chapter 18, the whole book of that whole chapter, there are many, many verses there that speak about uncleanness and unclean when it comes to relationships between mother and a father, between brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and people outside of marriage, between prostitutes and all sorts of things. In every single aspect in Leviticus chapter 18, the meaning there is illicit and unnatural and unlawful sex outside of marriage. It is for this reason that Moses allowed this bull of divorcement. In Ezekiel chapter 16 verse 36 and Ezekiel chapter 23 verse 29, nakedness here is the same word that is used in Leviticus and in Deuteronomy, and it refers to an act of whoremongering. In the Old Testament, this is punishable by death. It is also for this reason that Jesus here uses the word fornication in the New Testament in Matthew. The Greek word here is the word porneia, which is where we get the common word for porn from. It refers to an adulterer, adultery, incest, prostitution, and in general, porn. Metaphorically and figuratively, it also refers to idolatry. Seeing that Israel was regarded as the spouse of Jehovah, any involvement in idolatry, worshipping of false gods, was considered figuratively as fornication. And so in the New Testament as well, Christians that are bought by the blood of Jesus Christ are referred to as the bride of Christ. Idolatry of any kind, putting anything before God, therefore figuratively is considered fornication or idolatry. So this exception clause has a very serious connotation to it. Remember in the Old Testament that if you're caught as an adulterer or as a fornicator, you were to be put to death. Remember Moses and the Israelites on their journey to the promised land had conquered many, many nations. And one of the laws that God and the commandments that God had told them was not to take on the gods and the women and the culture of those nations. But what did the Israelites do? They put aside the laws of God and started to intermarry with these idolatrous women, with these with these nations that really did not seek after God. So is this exception clause the thing that we can use to justify divorce? What is Jesus' answer about divorce? Jesus' answer goes back to the creation account of God's original intention for marriage in Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. Jesus quotes Genesis chapter 1 verse 27. The Creator made them male and female. And in Genesis 2 verse 24, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Next, he underlines the fact that when a man and a woman are married, they are no longer two, but one. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. Let's look at Matthew chapter 9 and verse 6. Matthew chapter 19, and verse 6. And what does this say to us? Let's begin at verse 3. When the Pharisees come to Jesus, hoping to tempt him into something false. Verse 3 of chapter 19 of Matthew. The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? And he answered and said unto them, Have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? And said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and the twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. They say unto him, Why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement and put away? He saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered to put away your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. Verse 9, And I say unto you, Whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whosoever marrieth her which is put away, doth commit adultery. So you see here that Jesus' answer to divorce was that it was never from the beginning. The husband and the wife were to be held together. The husband, Jesus says, to hold fast to his wife. He is to protect her. He is to nourish her. He is to uphold her. And he is to honor her. In the ceremony of marriage, the two then become one flesh. And the reason why they become one flesh is that it becomes difficult to separate. And thirdly, he says, let no man put asunder. What does it mean then when God says, when Moses said, put away you can put away your wife? Because the Pharisees here and say, well, what about Moses? Moses wrote this letter of divorcement. Jesus said, well, it was because of the hardness of your heart, and we'll see about that later. Interestingly as well, that is only in Matthew, in the other Gospels, the writers never put the exception clause in. This exception clause that Jesus here refers to is only referred to in these two instances of Matthew. Makes you think that God's purpose and Jesus' answer about divorce is that it is a no-no. Why did Moses then allow divorce? As I already said, because of the hardness of their heart. That word, their hardness, refers to spiritual destitution. It is because the Israelites, their spiritual hardness, their barrenness to follow, and to have spiritual health in their soul, because they disobeyed the commandment of God, Moses permitted, or God permitted, or allowed this bill of divorcement. Remember, there's a big difference between what is permitted and what we should or shouldn't do. Sometimes you are permitted to do something, but oftentimes that goes at an extremely high cost. Moses permitted this because of the hardness of their heart. It was never a commandment from God. It was never allowed by God. The goal here in divorce is always reconciliation. In Galatians chapter 6 verse 1, Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, He which are spiritual restores such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. God does not want this conflict to continue. He wants people, He wants marriages, He wants relationships to be reconciled, to come together as one flesh. Again, divorce is permitted in cases of fornication or this porneia. It is never a commandment and never meant to be an easy way out. Reconciliation is always the goal. The mindset should be, how can we work through the serious breach in our relationship? And never, how can I get out of it? There are many cases in today where there is lots of violence, and especially in South Africa, violence against women. And what I would never, and I'm sure many people in our church would agree with me, we would never recommend for anyone to continue in a situation like that. But remember this, man is deceitful and desperately wicked above all things. The heart is deceitful, desperately wicked above all things. Who can know it? It is man that created divorce. It is man's sin that allows him to be so wicked and so brutal. And when we find a woman in a situation where she's been abused, for the safety of that person, it is best to intervene and separate those people out. Nevertheless, if God can forgive with proper counseling and proper treatment, we can all come to forgive. In 1 John chapter 1 verse 9 says, if we confess our sins, He is faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Remember, God doesn't want you to separate. God doesn't want you to be divorced. There's always a way out in many, many cases. Yes, I agree, in the case where there's abuse and certain other form of criminality, that might be difficult. And that's where the permission comes in, but it's never the intention of God. Thank you, and God bless you.